BHP, the world's largest miner, has just kicked back over $10 billion to its shareholders following a big sale of U.S. shale assets. Clara, this is a pretty big move, and they did it quite quickly after the sale. It meets one of Elliott Management's requests that has been kind of lobbying BHP to make these various structural changes to improve returns. What's your take on BHP's decision here, and what does it imply going forward?
Well, first of all, this is what BHP promised. So it's part of a trend that has seen mining companies pretty much since the end of the commodities boom hand back a lot more cash to shareholders to really improve their dividend payouts and the total shareholder return. This is a remarkable sum of money that BHP is giving back, so $10.4 billion, pretty much everything they got from BP, and the statement went out within hours of the money landing in BP's account, but it is what they promised. Now, the interesting thing is obviously part of it is a buyback targeted, an off-market buyback targeted at the Australian listing, and part of it is dividend, and it's BHP's first buyback since 2011. So even though they have improved the dividend, they've really lagged Rio, for example, in terms of total shareholder return. So this does help redress the balance. Elliott, of course, had asked for this among other things.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was going right there, like in terms of the rest of the shopping list. One of the things that Elliott had been suggesting was that they should abandon their dual listing structure or make some changes there with a ticker up in London and in Australia. Do you think that's still in the cards?
Well, so there are two other main items I think we can point to. Part of it was the sale of the shale assets, which BHP has done, and indeed Elliott is asking for them to really remove themselves from oil altogether. That seems unlikely, certainly under the current management. Let's not forget Andrew Mackenzie, the current CEO, has an oil background. Now, in terms of the dual listing, that's become a lot more complicated since the shareholder mutiny at Unilever. Now, Unilever was trying to collapse its own dual listing structure into a Dutch structure, so that's an Anglo-Dutch structure. That hasn't gone well, and indeed Unilever has scrapped it. So that has certainly made it a lot harder for anyone lobbying for BHP to do the same. Obviously here with an Anglo-Australian structure being collapsed into an Australian company.
Now, more generally, this is a conservative move, it looks like, to just exit, a big investment, albeit one underwater, and just kick the money back instead of putting it elsewhere. We've seen other sides of some conservatism. You can just turn to this deal you wrote about, well, lack of a deal, in fact. Chinalco, this Chinese mining giant, has apparently let its bid lapse to acquire more control of the massive Simandou iron ore mine in Guinea. That seems like especially for China, which is very strategic thinking, and this is a state-owned company, so it's not really answerable to shareholders outside of Beijing. What's your interpretation of the decision-making there and what that implies for appetite in that sector?
Well, I think it says a lot about Simandou itself. Now, Simandou is probably one of the most interesting projects that we've seen over the last few years, and one of the most complicated. Now, it is in a very poor part of what is already a very poor country. In order to get any of that iron ore to market, Chinalco and indeed Rio, which was selling its stake to Chinalco, would have had to build something like 700 kilometers of rail, bridges, tunnels, and a deep water port. I mean, the cost is astronomical, about 23 billion in pretty much in infrastructure alone. So it's not surprising to see them pull back. Now, what is surprising, I guess, is to see Chinalco pull back. We're used to seeing a lot more strategic more of a strategic take from the large state-owned companies in China. So I think we took it as a slightly bearish sign.
I mean, this asset was supposed to give them, not exactly swing status, but it was going to be, or at least seen as enough to give them a lot more influence over pricing over this material that consumes a lot. I was just wondering, does this reflect more of a market-oriented, price-sensitive approach more generally, or just conservatism in China about, actually how much more infrastructure and stuff they're going to build?
It's hard to say because we don't really know what the decision-making was within the Ghanaian government. Certainly, Rio and Chinalco have only half of this absolutely huge reserve. Chinalco had asked for the whole thing, and the Ghanaian government said no, so perhaps it was just too many obstacles in what is already an extremely challenging project, and they have other options. Whether they could have influenced the market, I suspect not, given that, the absolutely huge volumes that are still coming out of the Pilbara, but certainly it tells us a lot about West Africa. West Africa was, in the boom years, supposed to be a new iron ore frontier, and the sort of shelving of Simandou even further down the shelf than it was before really tells us a lot about those prospects.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it. Thanks for talking to me, Clara. And thanks for watching.